This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of November 30th, 2020. You know, I was thinking over the weekend about Quibi. Oh, I'm sure you've already forgotten about Quibi. Quibi has gone. They were a unique service, unique only to 2020, that gave you extremely short subscription content. It didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time, but it makes even less sense to me now that they're gone. But this podcast really isn't about Quibi. It's about the folks who are probably more glad that Quibi crashed and burned than anybody else. And who's that? Peacock. Peacock is the streaming service brought to you by Comcast and Universal, and they are probably extremely thrilled that Quibi got all the negative publicity that it did over the last couple of months. Why? Because it's allowed Peacock to fly under the radar to some extent. Peacock is a streaming service that launched with a whole bunch of fanfare and a whole bunch of bad luck this year. They were originally going to launch in concert with the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, which of course did not happen, but they launched anyway. They launched with a decent amount of original content, including a sitcom from Britain that really wasn't very good and an adaptation of Brave New World that couldn't have come at a necessarily worse time. Nobody really wanted to talk about a dystopian future where America has turned into a shambles. And now Peacock is out there with a mix of mostly catalog content, old movies, and very little unique and interesting content. And it makes you kind of wonder, okay, well, what is their next move? Clearly, they have to do something in order to make sure that they thrive in the next couple of years. They can't just kind of sit there and, collect money because people are probably not going to pay for it. It's something that most likely Comcast subscribers will get for free and very few other folks are going to be interested in. There's just very little content that you can find on Peacock that you can't find on other places, at least for the moment. And I'll get to that in a minute. But Peacock is more of a cautionary tale, I think, because it could have been a really good service. It could have been another Hulu. It could have been another Disney Plus, which I hate to say it, Disney Plus manages to eke out just enough original content to keep people paying for it. The same thing with Apple TV Plus, which has managed to inexplicably keep its head above water, even though there haven't been the kind of accolades that people thought they were going to be. Instead, Peacock is much more like CBS All Access, which is soon to be rebranded Paramount Plus. It's a place to find very little unique content and a lot of old stuff that you can probably find in other places. Not super duper interesting. And I'm going to forecast that in the coming months, we're all going to leave our houses at some point. And we're going to go out and enjoy the sun again. And probably there will be less demand for streaming than there was in 2020 when there wasn't a whole lot else to do. And that means that there are going to be some harsh realities out there for services that really aren't holding it together. The folks at Peacock probably could have been the sad news story of the streaming world in 2020, but instead that went to Quibi. And as I said, Peacock is very, very glad of that because it's funny. I'm not quite sure what turns something into a success as opposed to a failure, because the difference between Peacock and something like HBO Max is really kind of razor thin. HBO Max charges a lot more, but you get a lot more. Peacock charges nothing. It's basically free if you want an advertiser-supported service, but what you get just isn't a whole lot. The value equation for the two is surprisingly similar, and yet HBO Max is considered a total success, and Peacock has kind of been relegated to that. Who is that again? Bit of a shame there. And I think also the branding has something to do with it. HBO Max came out with really strong branding. HBO was one of the strongest brands in the AT&T portfolio, and they combined that with the word Max from Cinemax, kind of bring that back in. And so you got the feeling that it was something really kind of special. Oh, they could have just kept calling it HBO Plus, or even worse, called it something like AT&T Plus, because that seems to be the trend. But instead, they went with some smart branding, along with owning this bright purple color that they've got all over their website. On the other hand, Peacock didn't really speak to people. Okay, so if you really think about it, NBC's mascot is the peacock. The peacock is full of colors. The peacock's a very colorful and interesting thing. But people just didn't grab onto it. People don't care that, oh, it's a peacock. It's just not that interesting to them. It'll be interesting to see, I think, if Comcast stays with the Peacock branding as they continue to improve, or, well, what they're going to do. One possible answer for Comcast would just be to kind of roll over. After all, look at what CBS and Paramount are doing with Pluto TV, which they own. Pluto TV is an app which gives you hundreds of channels of totally free content, and it's all advertiser supported. And the majority of it comes from their library, so it doesn't cost them anything to acquire. A lot of folks thought that Pluto TV wouldn't succeed because who wants that many commercials in an hour? It turns out Pluto TV is more and more popular all the time because they've got good organization and a very cable TV-like experience that costs absolutely nothing. And Peacock could just roll over and be that. Peacock could just be the free advertiser-supported experience for those folks who want to watch NBC content. You have to assume that some of that NBC content is no longer going to be available on Hulu because Hulu is now completely owned by Disney. So it could just be where you go to watch that stuff instead of the NBC app. Maybe that's where it goes. I don't know. But the truth is, if the folks who were hoping that Peacock was going to be a premier destination, a truly premium package along the lines of Netflix or HBO Max, it's not going to get there. There's no value there, not to that level. And no, I wouldn't call it a failure. Far from it. I'm sure it's got great listenership and viewership numbers. And on top of which, if you really want to look at a failure, you have to just look at Quibi. That's where I started, was that the folks at Peacock have just got to be awfully glad that all the attention's on Quibi and not on them. That's kind of the idea of this podcast anyway. And that's all I've got for this week. Please go ahead and like and subscribe to wherever you get this podcast. That's what helps make me look good to my boss. And please remember, you can always leave a comment, and that comment can include topics for future podcasts. I look wherever your podcast is listened to, I look for the comments, and that's where I found some of the best topics for future podcasts. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week with a whole new one. Until then, have a great week.